people that truly are micromanagers and people that have problem delegating sometimes, it's about the idea of giving up the way to do it or that process to someone else. Now, maybe you want to coach them and guide them so that they don't get themselves in trouble during that process, or that they don't do something political that might really have them, step in a really gross, nasty puddle. But for the most part, just because a group wants to do something different than the way you would have done it, you have to get comfortable with that. The idea of giving up that power to someone else so that they can get from A to B in maybe a little bit of a different way, and maybe a better way than you would have done it, quite honestly, is what it comes down to. That is the huge part.
Hello and welcome to the Leadership Launchpad, where we help technical managers improve themselves, their teams, and their organizations. On this show, I talk with industry leaders, coaches, authors, and experts to give you actionable insights that will help improve your own performance and the performance of those around you. Our guest today is Ryan McCrea, the head of learning and leadership development at Ameren. Ryan is focused on making an impact in organizations through strategic talent management, leadership development, mentoring, team dynamics, and culture building. Prior to Ameren, Ryan was the vice president of talent development at Commerce Bank, where he launched a corporate-wide professional development program while overseeing the strategy around people and leadership growth. In this discussion, you can expect to learn the questions any individual contributor should be asking themselves before they become a people manager, the importance of dual-track career ladders, the most common challenges new managers face, and how you can overcome one of the most difficult challenges, delegating tasks to your new team. Before we get into that discussion, I want to make sure to remind you to make sure you're subscribed so that you never miss a future episode. And if you are already subscribed, then I ask that you would just take one moment to share this show with at least one other person. That, after all, is how we grow. I can't tell you how much it means to me. So with that, let's get into the discussion with Ryan McCrea. Welcome to the Leadership Launchpad. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Excited to get a chance to chat with you today.
Yeah, we had a really great discussion when we first met up a couple weeks ago that I thought was so interesting because, especially for you, you've worked currently you're working in a very technical company. You've worked in a lot of technical companies, but, a lot of that was around like biosciences, and you did a stint in banking. And one of the things that we had in our discussion that I thought was interesting, because I like to talk about when I say the leadership that I'm teaching is primarily geared towards technical people. Mm-hmm. And you kind of made this point of like, yeah, well, even in banking, there's technical people. When you think of technical people, what do you mean?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I've worked in a lot of different types of organizations. I've worked in 6 different types of organizations. One of them was a tech company, but I worked for a company that very technical, but you might not think is technical, like an agricultural company. Tons of scientists.
Yeah.
Now I work at an energy company. Obviously, it can be pretty technical. A lot of engineers when we think about that as well. So when I think of technical and technical skills, it's those things that are the non-human skills. So, we think about all the people skills. We've got that whole soft skills thing. Don't get me started. I hate the word soft skills. I know it started back in the day in the military, and it's kind of stuck. I'm not a fan. So I tend to call them people skills. So everything that's the non-people skills that it would take to do a job. Like, obviously I worked with scientists, so really understanding the scientific method, understanding how the processes work, understanding how the systems work, the technical skills that they had to do their job. Like that, to me, those are all the technical skills. So I think it's what do you need to know to be good in your field? And I think not only good in your field, but an expert in your field. I think that's what that really means to me, because I think a lot of organizations, I think, that do this well with technical people, they have that great individual contributor technical track. Yeah. Because I know a lot of scientists that just wanted to be a scientist. They never, ever wanted to be a manager in the first place. Yeah. Like they just wanted to be the best scientists that they could be.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, kind of on that point, like, what do you see as some of the common challenges that companies have when they're thinking about promoting technical talent? Because I think that's where the rub is that what often happens is clearly when somebody's getting promoted to their first people manager role, they're getting promoted likely because of their skills as an individual contributor. But then that doesn't necessarily mean that any of those skills translate. Like, what are the primary challenges that you see or gaps that you see companies have in identifying which excellent individual contributors, especially technical ones, will make good managers?
Well, I think that's the problem, and that's the rub that most organizations have. They
Yeah.
decide, okay, we're going to hire and put the best individual contributor into a manager role. So the one
Yeah.
that is, again, in the expert of their field from a technical perspective. But being a leader is a whole nother job. I think that's what
Yeah.
people sometimes don't think about. Like, yeah, someone that's going to be a good technical person will be able to help lead a team in the technical aspects of it, maybe. Just means they have the knowledge. That doesn't mean that they're able to share and grow and help others do that too. So
Yeah.
when you've got somebody moving from a very technical role into a leadership role, do they even really understand what they're getting into in the first place? Like a lot of times they take on that role because it's maybe the next thing to do or they feel it's important, but really they're taking a whole brand new spanking job is really what it gets down
Yeah.
to, like with a very different set of skills. Like to be a leader is a very, very different set of skills. And I think the big thing, I talk to people a lot when they're an individual contributor and they're going into that role, especially when they're a like high potential, very strong individual contributor, is the idea that this is no longer going to be about you.
There it
And
is.
that's a big one for people, is like when you're a strong individual contributor, you're there about you.
Yeah.
But once you
Yeah.
make that change into being a leader, it's not about you anymore. It's about your team. It's about the team goals. It's about motivating people. It's about developing people. It's about making sure that you do hit, those goals that you have as a department or what you need to do or what you're supposed to do for the organization. It can't just be about you anymore. So that's a huge
Yeah.
shift for people. Huge, huge shift. And I think that's where organizations kind of fall down sometimes, is one, not getting people prepared for that, not helping them understand that that's a huge shift and that it looks different, and then giving them the skills that they need, knowing that, hey, this is a different skill set, it's a different job. You're probably going to have to focus on some of these things in a way that you maybe haven't ever for the first time.
Yeah, and I think kind of to your point, since it is such a new skill set, something that a lot of these really high performers also have to realize is the thing that you are best at, you are no longer going to be best at.
Mm-hmm.
Almost by definition, if you're going to take time out of your schedule to get good at this other thing, you're going to start to neglect those coding skills or those whatever skills that got you there. They're going to start to atrophy, like they just have to, if you're actually going to give management its due.
100%. Like you are going to be delegating, hopefully, a lot of those
Yes.
things that maybe you really, really enjoy doing. I think that's why it's
Yeah.
so important for people to really understand, like, what are you jumping into? What are you getting into? Do you understand why you're doing some of these things? I mean, when I think about a new person jumping into a role, and this isn't probably just for technical people, this is quite honestly for anyone, I think, that's jumping in to a new manager role. Like, there's a couple very key things that I think they should know. One is, why do you want to be a leader? Like, why? Why do you want to be a leader in the first place? And I ask that because, are they doing it for the right reasons? If they're doing it for money, they're going to find that it's probably not worth it if they really don't like the idea of being a leader. So really understanding your why. That's a big one for me. Like, understand your why. And then what does it mean to be a good leader in the organization that you're in? Because that is not the same thing in every single organization. We know leadership doesn't have just one consistent definition across the world. That's just not the same. Not the same thing in
Yeah.
organizations too. So, what does it mean to be a good leader at that organization you're at? What are the expectations of a leader? And then you need
Yep.
a good realistic job preview. So like, and when I say a good realistic job preview, like, look, there's some things about being a manager that are awesome. And there's some things about being a manager that aren't great. And so you need to have the good, the bad, and the ugly. You need to like pull back the curtain and actually see it all for what it is and
Yeah.
understand kind of what you're getting into. And then
Yeah.
do a real good, and we'll get into this in a second, I think, probably, is a good self-assessment. Like, do you know what you are good at and what you're not good at from that management perspective? And so you
Yeah.
need to know and understand those things before you're jumping into a role. I think especially for technical people, because I see the challenge of like being a great technical person means that you're probably often more focused on solving problems,
Yeah.
very technical problems. But maybe where you don't do as much is communication and collaboration. And when you're a leader,
Yeah.
things like communication and collaboration, key. It's why it's
Yeah.
such a different role.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think those are such great examples of kind of questions and self-reflection that any person should be asking themselves prior to getting into a leadership role. When we think about things really tactically, like what have you seen organizations do, or maybe what have you done at an organizational level to help people do that self-reflection, like help them really make sure before they even become a people manager to understand if this is the right fit for them?
Yeah, I think, I've gotten an opportunity to be part of organizations where we've been really tactical about this.
Yeah.
So my favorite example came from an organization called Commerce Bank I was at. Wonderful organization. This work was done by a team that I was on. It was led by a woman named Carrie Kime. She was amazing. And so what we ended up doing was we really first started with just helping some of those early questions I talked about, like your why, and understanding a little bit more about what leadership is, having that realistic job preview, what is an expectations in that organization. Well, we did that. So what we started doing is doing what we called an aspiring manager discovery session. And it was open up to anyone in the organization that wanted to go with it. So you could have been there for 3 days or 30 years. If you got the itch and you decided you wanted to think about becoming a manager, you could sign up for that session. It was a 90-minute session. So 90 minutes, an hour and a half out of your day to answer some of those big questions we just talked about. Now, what we did is we had them do a little bit of pre-work. They did some pre-work, and they went and interviewed 3 or 4 managers. Go and talk to managers about managing, which you sometimes don't do when you talk to your manager, you talk to other managers. You don't actually talk about what does it mean to be a manager, and what do you like, what do you dislike, what do you really enjoy about it, what skills did you have to build to get there, what surprised you when you became a manager. So we gave them a list of questions and said, go talk to managers. Then they would come to the session, that 90-minute session, and we would do everything we just talked about. What is your why? What is a realistic job preview of what it means to be a manager? We called them, I think, the perks and the pitfalls of being a manager. And what did it mean to be? What were those things that you had to do? Well, you're going to have hard conversations. You're going to have to do performance reviews with individuals. Yeah. Sometimes you're going to have to tell people no. I mean, are you okay? Are you ready to deal? Sometimes you might have to deal with emotions. Are you ready? Are you comfortable? When we think about super technical people, dealing with emotions is sometimes not their strong suit.
Yeah.
Not their strong suit. So do you know what you're getting into? So they did that session. They did that 90-minute session. And then there was some post work. We gave them a workbook to sit down with their leader and have that conversation and talk about what did they learn from that? What did that mean for their psyche and what they thought next steps were in their career? And then we had them make a decision. So we actually had them go in and answer a survey that said, yeah, I want to be a leader right now, or maybe I might want to be a leader, or this kind of made the decision very easy for me. I do not want to be a leader. This is not something I'm interested in. So we gave them a few options. We actually tracked those. And then the individuals that were interested in doing that, we introduced a 6-month session called, Aspiring Managers. And then it was, I think, Journey to Management or something of the sort like that.
Okay.
And that was a 6-month session where we actually dug into a lot of these different pieces of communicating and how important it was and how you could do it and how you should do it. And again, what are these expectations of a manager? Understanding your why, really digging in, finding out what it is that you wanted your management style to be. But then digging into all these different important aspects of, again, how do you hold somebody accountable as a manager? That's a huge, huge part of it. How do you have a hard performance conversation? That's a huge, huge part of it. And then in the last session, we actually said, okay, so how can we help prepare these individuals to be into those roles, to get into those roles? And what we ended up doing was really spending most of that time talking about what did it mean to do a good behavioral interview? What did it mean to maybe share your why or how you were going to market yourself? What were some of the pitfalls and things that people didn't do well in internal interviews? Because sometimes people don't do internal interviews well because they're like, oh, well, I'm already here. And they don't bring their A game. You can't do that. You still got to bring your A game, even if it's an internal interview. So we tried to prepare them so that when they were interested and when those roles came up and they interviewed, that maybe they would do better than just hopefully jumping into it and hoping they were going to do okay. We actually then, when people graduated those programs, gave all those names to the recruiters in the recruiting department so that they knew and were very aware of the people that had management on their mind, and also had gotten the opportunity to learn some of these things too.
I don't think I have ever heard a clearer what's in it for me answer from a learning program, right? Where like you very clearly and deliberately created a learning program. It's like, no, like this is how it's going to help your career move forward, which is what is so often missing. It's just like, oh, we're learning these skills, or oh, we're getting this knowledge and I don't know really how it's going to apply. It's like, this is going to put you on a special list that the recruiters are all going to see. And, I mean, that's amazing. Going back to the tracking that you said you did. So two questions on that. First, did you do like a before and after of like how many people wanted to do it before the session, the 90-minute session and the homework, and how many wanted to do it after? Because that'd be a cool thing to see.
I don't think we did that, though. I agree.
Okay.
As being a stats guy, I'm surprised that I let my team get away with not doing that.
Yeah.
Quite honestly.
So then for the post stuff, do you remember roughly like coming out of it, what the percentages were like? Were most people like really bought in, or having to do it? Were there a fair number that were like, I kind of learned I didn't want to do this?
I think the people that were still pretty bought in and said, yep, I think I kind of want to move forward with this, I would say realistically was probably like 30 to 40%. Then you had some that I think still wanted to be managers, just maybe not yet.
Yeah.
And there definitely were some that came out of that were like,
yeah,
I don't think this is for me, at least for right now. Who knows what their life was going to be 5-10 years from now. But at that point in time, for that situation, for where they were in their life, they're like, okay, yeah, this is not something I want to jump into. That is definitely not responsibility that I want. That maybe that was different than the expectations of what I thought a leader was going to be. It was, we actually did those once a quarter, because we used those discovery sessions we were talking about, not only to help people learn, but we used them as a feeder pool into this other program, of course.
Yeah,
so when we first launched those discovery sessions, I think we maybe set up 3 or 4, like within, first launching them. They filled up within minutes, Matt. Minutes. It was like we were selling concert tickets. They filled up in minutes, and we had a 90-person wait list.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, I believe
that's when in our work in L&D that like you've done something right, like you've put the product out there that people really need when something like that happens. And we were like, we hit the nail on the head with this. This is exactly what everyone was needing. That's what we were hearing.
Perfect.
But we put it out there, and it's like, that was definitely, I like to think about everything we do in HR as products. Like that was a product that, there was the demand. We were hearing the demand. We supplied the demand.
I love it.
Boy, did it come. They bought what we were selling.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's incredible. And it's one thing that's interesting that I think about the statistics, and you're saying that there were those people that said, "Oh, I'm not really ready for this," or "I'm not sure." I think there's that challenge of judging effectiveness when training people skills, because they're things that people so often reflect on. And I'm a big believer in like confidence level as a really important indicator, especially in this space, since true ROI can be really hard to pin down in terms of like, you just need a lot of time. Like you need a lot of time and resources to really see that effectiveness. And so I like confidence level. But what can happen actually is, for some of these skills, a person can go through an amazing course that really helped them, and their confidence level might go down simply because they're learning all the things that they didn't know. And that's a good outcome. Even though it might seem at the face like a bad outcome, which is interesting. So you do all this great work to kind of prep people and get people ready. A lot of organizations obviously don't do that. Whether it's, based on your experience, let's move now. Okay, so people get promoted. What are some of the most common pitfalls that you see, maybe specifically to technical managers? Like we touched on this, you touched on this a little bit earlier. What are some of the most common challenges that you see in them making the transition?
Yeah, there's definitely some very key things that I see with technical managers when they jump into management for the first time. I think one, communication skills. Like again, very tactical people trying to solve problems, love that from that perspective. Sometimes that idea of communicating with others, and definitely communicating a clear message, because those people usually super smart. So there's a lot going on up here.
Yeah.
But do they know how to communicate that in an articulate and a succinct way to help others understand?
Distill it down.
So that's a big one. And I think very similar to that is then sharing a vision. Because if you can't communicate well and communicate articulately and specifically in kind of what's going on in your head, it's really hard to share a vision or a strategy for a group that you're in. So that is sometimes an area that I see kind of, if we want to bucket all that as communication, but communication, strategy, like that piece is one of the areas that I see quite a bit, for sure.
Yeah, there's a reason why like the Neil deGrasse Tysons and the Brian Greens and stuff stand out, because it's a skill that's so often lacking. And so when people are good at taking all these complex ideas, Elon Musk talks about my mind is a storm, and he, despite everything that he does, like if you listen to it, like he has a difficulty, like just in really distilling it down into a simple structure that people can follow. You have to like kind of really want to follow it.
100%. I've gotten the opportunity to have lunch every once in a while here and there with one of those very brilliant type of people, and including one of the founders of, I think it was Square here in St. Louis. And I was just like, brilliant guy. Probably his ability to articulate, like it was one of the weirdest lunches I've ever been at in my life.
I bet.
Great guy, super smart guy, like very personable in a lot of ways, but just kind of weird and awkward. So, I mean, sometimes that exists, sometimes it doesn't. Definitely saw it a lot with scientists. I've even seen it with people like lawyers and really anyone that you can think of, engineers, of course. Seen it with a lot of different groups, data scientists. I've seen some challenges there as well. So that's definitely one area for me. I think the idea of dealing with emotions is something that's challenging for them, and having hard conversations. That I've found something specifically in technical people to be really, really hard. And that is such an important part of being a leader. And now, this day, it's more important part of being a leader than it ever has been, because there is this shift from the command and control leadership. And maybe you could, get promoted as an engineer and be a good command and control leader, because you don't have to worry about emotion, showing vulnerability, having connection with people. It's fine. Doesn't matter. I'm good technically at what I am. But in today and age, it's just that you need that, you need that ability to be a human-centric leader. It's this idea of being able to hold people accountable, and also making sure that you have the appropriate level of kind of vulnerability and some empathy for the people that you're leading, that you're thinking about that. People have choices, and the pandemic shattered all of that in work as far as I'm concerned. Like, it just shattered it. It's out. It's out of Pandora's box. You can't stick it back in. And if leaders aren't being able to do that, then that's a challenge. And I think technical leaders struggle with that. And I think in the same vein, influencing others. Like, that's not something they usually have to do when you're someone that's very technical. So the idea of influencing others, selling others on things, managing up is an area that I see a lot of new managers and leaders struggle with, but especially those technical leaders for sure. And then I think one of the biggest ones is, because they were so strong, again, those high potential, really strong individual contributors getting promoted, is delegating. Delegating, again, that ability, those things to others, because they're so good at it. I'm so good at coding. Yeah. Why would I give this to someone else? Well, you have to.
Yes.
Because that's not what we pay you for anymore.
It's interesting. I remember reading years ago. So there's a very old HBR article called "Leadership That Gets Results," and it was this massive study where they created these different leadership styles, and everybody has multiple leadership styles, just like everybody has different personality styles. But I remember taking the assessment to find out where I was, and this, it's things like coaching, dictator, pace setting, like those kinds of things, relational. And I remember getting excited because I scored really high on pace setter. And I'm reading the description of pace setter, and it's like leads from the front, leads by example, is always doing the best work, of the team, like showing everybody what to do. And then I go, and this was based on a huge data set, and it shows the long-term impact of all the different leadership styles. And pace setting was right next to coercive as the only two like negative impacting styles. And I was it was the heart, like it was such an explosion in my brain when I read this, because literally when you're reading the description, it's like, this is what a leader is supposed to be. But then when you think about all the second order ramifications of it. You're micromanaging. You're not letting people solve their own problems. You're just doing all of these things that's just taking power away from your team. And certainly in short-term bursts, maybe it's required. Even something like a coercive leadership style maybe is required in certain extreme emergency moments. But it's not something that you lean into. And ever since then, I think pace setting is almost like the default of a high performer that gets promoted, because like you said, they're almost by definition the best at the things that their team does. And so it becomes really difficult for them to leave. I'd love to sit on that for a moment. What advice do you give? How do you train new managers to get better at that delegation?
Yeah, that is a great question. So I think you have to learn to set expectations of what you're hoping or what you're thinking in your head, but give people the freedom to get from A to B in a different way than you would get to from A to B. I think that's the biggest part of it. Like people that truly are micromanagers and people that have problem delegating sometimes, it's about the idea of giving up the way to do it or that process to someone else. And so you have to be okay if they get to Z, which is where you wanted them to go. Now, if you usually do that in a straight line, but they're going to do it in a bunch of squiggly lines to get there, what the important thing is did they get to Z? Now, maybe you want to coach them and guide them so that they don't get themselves in trouble during that process, or that they don't do something political that might really have them, step in a really gross, nasty puddle. But for the most part, just because a group wants to do something different than the way you would have done it, you have to get comfortable with that. And for people that are so right-brained like that are so technical, the idea of giving up that power to someone else so that they can get from A to B in maybe a little bit of a different way, and maybe a better way than you would have done.
Exactly.
It, honestly,
that's what I was going to say.
That's what it comes down to. That is the huge part. It's just they sometimes have to start small. Like, how do I start giving some of this away in small little increments and making sure that we're really digging into it and touching on this? Because it's sometimes if you start just giving everything away, it's hard for people. But it's a skill you have to work on. It's a muscle. You got to build that muscle.
I like that idea of starting as small as possible, starting with the small projects that you can let go of. And I think you hit the nail on the head of yes, though many times you're going in a straight line and they're kind of twisting around. Maybe you're the one twisting around and you don't even realize it, and they find the straighter line and they end up finding the better way. But I think when it comes to the long term, that's the only way that either the team or them is going to get any better. And so you have to. I like that technique of just kind of lowering the bar, minimum viable delegation project, and then go from there, and then go. Do you ever have people, they try that? I'm sure you've heard stories of just like, oh, I tried that and everybody messed it up. Does that come up a lot? Is that a limitation on folks, you think?
Yeah, sometimes. Then that tells me that they're still really stuck in the mindset. And so that's when the coaching comes in. That's when okay, so how did they mess it up? Okay, so who believes that they messed it up? Did you believe they messed it up? Do you have stakeholders? What was the stakeholders' perspective on what that looked like? What was the team's perspective on what that looked like? So when you say they messed it up, who says they messed it up? So I think having them think through that a little bit, and a lot of times it was, oh, well, no, the stakeholders didn't have any problem with it. No, it's been working really well. People have liked it. Okay, so is that about you or them?
I like that. Yeah, I love that you centered on kind of delegation as being just such an important factor, because in so many ways it can be just a vicious spiral of the leader is so stressed because they're keeping it all on their shoulders. They're trying to do everything. So they're just becoming an ever worse leader as they continue to take more and more on. The people on the team, not only are they not getting a chance to kind of exercise their own skills, but they're feeling demotivated, they're feeling more detached, and so they just become less and less invigorated by the work or engaged in the workplace. And it can just kind of, both sides are just going in opposite directions from one another. So I can see why that would probably be one of the first things to focus on is that delegation piece. I love that.
And I don't think we're making it easier in organizations these days either, because, think about all the people that have been let go, especially in the tech world. Like, we see these huge tech companies shedding tons of people. So organizations are getting flatter and flatter, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. There's good and there's positive things that come with that. One of the not so positive things that I've seen in the last 5 to 10 years that, quite honestly, Matt, keeps me up at night is the idea of kind of the perils of being a player coach. And we see this.
That was going to be my next question. Yeah.
We see this a lot, like these old ideas, and I'm seeing it more and more. I remember even 5-10 years ago when I started my career, managers were given time to be managers.
Yeah.
Managers are very rarely now given actual time to be managers. Like, everyone is a player coach. Like, I'm a player coach, but at my level, maybe that's okay. Directors in my company are player coaches. VPs in my company, I would say, are player coaches in the one that I'm currently at right now. And that's not too dissimilar to other organizations that I've been at too. I've been at a couple of those where where I've seen that there is definitely a very different line between, again, this whole delegation of you're a player, you're a coach. What's a big challenge here, though, is I don't think as organizations is they incentivize someone to be a manager. They incentivize them to be a good player. The pace setting you were talking about. So organizations often reward the pace setting behaviors, not the management behaviors. So again, if you're running a sales team, well, you're going to get a big old bonus because you still decided to keep that $3 million account and get the big bonus that comes with that instead of delegating it.
Yeah.
So why would I delegate that when that's my vacation to Tahiti there?
Yeah.
So we're not actually structuring either the organization or our policies or our procedures or the way we manage performance to actually make sure that people are doing the coach side of that more than the player side of it. So if we don't have the environment around us actually supporting us to be a good manager, this whole player coach thing is going to keep getting worse and worse and worse. So that keeps me up at night all the time because I just feel like most managers actually don't have time to manage anymore. When I talk to managers, the first thing I hear out of my mouth is just,
don't have time.
I just don't have time. I don't have time to be a good manager.
Yeah. Yeah. Can a manager... So how do you suggest people get out of that? Is it if the incentives aren't there, is it just kind of, I guess even if the incentives aren't there, you still just work on the delegation for your own sanity, I suppose.
I think to work on it for your own sanity, really understanding, because one of the last things I was going to say I see sometimes a problem with technical people is developing and growing others. Because it's not a mindset that they had before that. So developing and growing others. And that's if you can get people into that mindset and help them understand why that's important for the organization and why that's important for their team and also important for, I think, the dynamic of their team and the growth of their people and for actually keeping those people on your team, because you don't want to have to hire someone every 2 months because you are not a good leader that's not growing and developing your people. Like, they have to understand that from that perspective. But also, I would say, as an organization, look at your policies and procedures and everything that's going on there. How are you actually rewarding this behavior? So one of the companies I was at, that big agricultural company I was at, they actually rewarded development behavior. So when you think about the bonuses that you got at the end of the year, you were looked at, your performance was looked at for sure, 100%.
Yeah.
But if you were a leader at this organization, there was a portion of your bonus that was based on that. There was a portion of your bonus that was based on whether you were developing or not. And then there was a portion of your bonus based on whether you were developing your team or not. So if you weren't developing yourself, you got hit in the pocket. If you weren't developing your team, you got hit in the pocket. You lost thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars for not developing your team. That was the place, I think, where they did the best at like putting their money where their mouth was when it comes to this. And really saying development is important to us. In fact, it's so important to us that we will minimize your bonus based on you not spending time developing your people. But I also think they did a really good job at that organization, specifically of giving managers time to manage.
Yeah.
Because that would have probably been fairly unfair if they didn't actually give their teams opportunity to manage.
Absolutely. Yeah. Awesome. Well, this has been a great discussion, Ryan. I've really enjoyed it. I love how we got pretty tactical for both the company perspective and the individual perspective on some things we can help in making that first jump, especially for technical folks. Any closing thoughts? Where can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, excellent. I think the best place to get in touch with me is on LinkedIn. You can keep track of what I'm doing, what I'm out there. I talk a lot about work. I talk a lot about psychology. I talk about learning and leadership development. So that's where I kind of share my thoughts, my ideas, and really what I'm doing in the different companies that I'm working at too, which I think people really like seeing. It's that practical real aspect that we kind of got a little bit into today, Matt, and people love that. So yeah, I would say catch me there. That's the best place to get me.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being here. I hope you have a great rest of your day. All the listeners, thank you so much. I'll see you on the next episode.
Sounds great.
Thank you so much for listening to today's show. If you are looking for help turning your organization's great engineers into great managers, me and my team at Better Everyday Studios would love to help. We deliver targeted and interactive training workshops that are designed to help build the 3 fundamental skills of any new manager: building trust, giving feedback, and setting goals. Reach out to me through matt@bettereverydaystudios.com so we can start making your organization better every day.